Thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to have Dustin Kiskaddon with us to talk about his latest tattoo book. We're all tattoo enthusiasts, so we're gonna jump right in. Yeah, we got our
It's
copy.
probably backwards, but
So, my name is Beverly Thompson. I'm a sociology professor up here in upstate New York, and I wrote a book about women in tattoos. Came out in 2015, and I can tell already that the stuff is times are changing. Things are a lot more accepting for women and other folks to get into the profession. So it's really exciting to talk about this latest book where you really talk about queer people, women, and stuff like that. So very excited to be here today. I'll hand it over to Akello.
and my name is Akello Stone. I'm in Los Angeles, California. I've been teaching at the community college level for 23 years. And of course, tattooing is something of interest to me. And I've had a lot of tattooing experiences, and I've really never talked much about them with people. I kind of just think about them. So some of the experiences that were written in this book, I just was really excited to find somebody who's kind of looking at the tattoo shop experience kind of in the way that I have in that way.
So Dustin Kiskaddon, or shall I say Dr. Dustin Kiskaddon?
Hey.
I taught in the community college world for roughly 9 years. I served as a lecturer at UC Davis as well, and
Mm.
very much was on the path to try my best to become a professor. It was my dream. I did my PhD in sociology and wrote this book, Blood and Lightning, on becoming a tattooer. It's published with Stanford University Press this year, year of this recording, 2024. And I'm really excited about the book. I still love the project. And I guess I would say that I'm a tattoo enthusiast, although, I did tattoos for 3 years professionally after apprenticing into the trade in a street shop in Oakland, California. And I have a complicated relationship with tattoos and tattooing that I hope to explore with you all today. But I'm happy to set up the book, describe my path toward writing it. And I guess right now I'll just say that this book really is the outcome of an authentic curiosity, and it is a desire to understand something that kind of blew my mind. And I left the academic world, really left the teaching recently, and was able to trust that in writing the book, I wasn't fighting for tenure and I wasn't setting myself up for articles, and got to work with Stanford to write the book that I really, 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 really wanted to read and wanted to write, and was deeply inspired by memoir and stuff. So there's a lot about this book that is speaking directly to sociologists, to sociology students. I think I would have loved to be able to teach with it, but it's also now a passion project for me, kind of outside of tattooing and outside of sociology, per se.
Yeah, excellent. Well, can you tell us a bit about your background? Like, where were you born and raised, and then fast forward to academia?
For sure. So I come from a family of people who did not go to college. I was born in Bakersfield, California, which has been featured in several movies. In the famous movie Castaway, starring Tom Hanks, Bakersfield shows up on the side of a porta potty that washes ashore on his island.
Bakersfield.
And this is kind of the reputation of that town. It's an hour and a half east of Los Angeles. Akello, you've probably driven through Bakersfield.
Yeah, I know a little bit about it.
And you might agree, people call it the armpit of California. And my experience there was disrupted for roughly 8 years when I lived as a child in southern Louisiana in a smaller town. But my main roots are in Bakersfield because I moved back, spent my high school years there. And while we could talk about my childhood, it is interesting to see elements of my upbringing making their way through my path, becoming a sociologist, in writing the book. I mean, it's no accident that I ended up, for my dissertation project, spending thousands of hours in a tattoo shop, listening to punk rock music and learning how to do this thing for real. Beverly, you've spoken previously in your work about teachers and professors who have tattoos and about the kind of historical expectation that professors are these kind of buttoned up, boring characters, and how now a lot of people you've been meeting are kind of, well, a bit more subcultural and have those roots. I mean, I'm no exception there. My interest in sociology is directly formed from an experience in the punk rock scene and with a guy who used to be a bartender who told me about sociology one day in the afternoon. And so I came into sociology really excited about its ability to describe the world and its ability to shed light on things that I had been thinking about a lot, kind of organically. I became motivated politically as an activist and saw sociology as a path through which I might achieve political understanding and organizing. Now, the path to the book, though, really kind of, well, it comes out of an experience like many PhD students have in searching for a PhD topic, a dissertation topic. I was like in my PhD thinking, what am I going to do? But I always knew I wanted to write a book. That was my aim as a graduate student. I thought, I'm here to write a book, and these people are here to help me, and let's do that. And so the book's origins really have this kind of punk rock feel to them. But I came at the project in one of the most, at least on the surface, one of the most seemingly boring subsections of sociology, which is the sociology of professions and economic sociology, two kind of subfields that I thought, at least upon first encounter, were incredibly boring and not related to things that I cared about. However, if you're curious enough, you can, approach any of these things and find kind of revelatory power in their teachings. And so, I never thought like, oh, I would be advising my younger, sociology students to go study the professions. But what occurred to me was this moment that I had found out in the world where tattoo artists were arguing about whether or not like young wannabe tattooers could go to school and learn how to tattoo through schools. And I thought, oh, this is like a central sort of question in the history of professions. Like, when do they organize? When did doctors begin to get doctoral degrees and start signing oaths? When did lawyers start passing the bar? And why haven't tattoo artists organized to prevent, or rather to gain some control over who gets in and who gets out? And why haven't they, sociologically speaking, professionalized? So I came at the project with this seemingly, I thought at first, a boring question, but it sort of unraveled into a set of questions that I found completely fascinating and totally related to my life. I became a tattoo apprentice, however, through a kind of just the means of pure ethnography. I mean, I'm a curious person. I love talking with people, and ended up uh, gaining a really good relationship with the guy who had been tattooing me for years, and eventually convinced him to allow me to hang out at his shop and just sit there and take notes and participate. And I simply just didn't stop going. I would show up in the mornings, clean the toilet, mop the floor, run errands, hang out. I became part of the scene. And after 4 months of that, spending tons of time there working in the shop for no money, he essentially challenged me to apprentice, in part because of our rapport that we can describe further, which has a lot to do with my background, but also I could always draw and stuff. So I was always drawing in the shop, and they were pretty impressed by that.
Like when you were taking notes, then did you have a process? Did you go home? Did you type them up? Did you start to like categorize them, or was it more down the line after you had accumulated enough notes?
This is my first big project. I had done some reporting and things like that in the past, but I was really quite concerned with the mechanics of data analysis and collection. That is, taking notes, you're writing down direct quotes. Do I record people in the world? How do I let everyone know that I'm here to do a project? And so I was above board from the get-go. My mentor who owns the shop, his name is Matt Decker at Premium Tattoo in Oakland. He's a really curious guy and really open to thinking about the world and was really digging on what I was doing. So I was fortunate to land in a scene that was quite amenable to the task of qualitative research. That is, taking notes, paying attention, watching, asking questions that initially seemed really quite dumb.
Well,
All
more
right.
like, like I guess everybody has their own methods, and some people, I mean, wait till a certain amount accumulate and then they type them all up, and some people immediately when they get home they type them up and organize them and maybe add to it so they don't forget. I just was curious on kind of the methodological process involved in your data collection.
Fortunately, like a lot of younger students, I mean, I was initially worried about figuring out how to take notes, especially spending many hours a day in a tattoo shop and wondering, first of all, what notes to take? What about this situation do I pay attention to? How do I go about lending that attention while still remaining in the scene itself? And the question of what about my presence is going to alter the scene, right? People know that I'm here. People know that I'm here to do a
Mm.
research project. Are they going to act differently due to my presence? But and I write about this in the book, but there's plenty of ethnographers out there who have, in their books, written about how surprised they were upon finding that their presence didn't seem to alter the situation kind of at all, maybe at first. But the idea is that these social situations have an inertia to them that is stronger than your presence. And so I found myself initially worried about being the fly on the wall or being as I was, the heavy participant in the situation. And what I did was use a number of means. So first of all, I tried to take notes on everything. Upon walking to the shop every day in the morning, I would speak into my phone through a voice to text memo situation, or rather application. And I would take notes of the weather. I would take notes of the day of the week. I would take notes of my expectations for that day. I would record how I felt. I would record things about the project. So any kind of ideas that were coming to my mind around certain concepts or books that I had just read. And upon entering the shop would go about my daily duties, but in situ recording all the time. And so actually, it's not at all strange to be a tattoo artist or to be anyone working in a tattoo shop and sit on your phone all the time if you're not actively tattooing or mopping the floor, in part because, as you all know, tattooers have to do a ton of self-promotion, and most of that takes place in social media. And so if you know a tattooer and they're your friend and you're out to eat with them, they're likely going to be looking at their phone for some certain amount of time, and it's kind of annoying to everyone else around them, but they're like, dude, this is my business, like I have to be doing this all the time. So that was great cover. That necessity was great cover for me to
Mm.
type dialogue directly into my phone, sneak into the bathroom taking notes, writing notes in my sketchbook. And a lot of this could go straight from voice to text. So later on, upon walking to the train or getting home, I would try to capture as much as possible. And then I would take all of that. So imagine every day has like multiple pages. I put them into the same document, save it to a secured drive, and clean them up as I go if I could. So the practice I really do promote now is take as many notes as possible. This is what I did. And what I found was that later on, things that I initially thought were extraneous became central to the story, such as notes around how strange it felt at first to touch people's bodies, to shave the hair off of their legs, to put people through pain. These weren't things that I initially thought would become central to my analysis of tattoo labor. In fact, they seemed really extra at the time. And so it was upon looking back through my notes and doing the analysis that I found patterns that eventually became themes, that became the dissertation, that became the actual book, which is like more of a readable experience with characters and with an arc and with tension and with actual storytelling built in.
I had a question on that because you do mention in the book taking notes in the scene there. I'm wondering behind that scene of communicating with your professors, like was there how was that as far as were they enthusiastic about your topic or any pushback there? And even did they have any kind of expertise or point you in the right direction for literature or questions? And then you're, I imagine, communicating with your professors throughout the process of conducting the ethnography. So what are their feedbacks?
I love this question, Beverly, and it's so nice to speak with sociology professors because I'm often talking at like indie bookstores or to audiences that are very different, or rather that don't have this experience that you're describing. So to dive in, to really nerd out on that, I like a lot of PhD students was searching for a topic, was really searching for people, for my people. Who am I going to work with? And it's quite often that students try to attach themselves to professors who have a similar area of study, of expertise, whether it's a method or if it's a body of literature. And I found myself gravitating toward a couple of people, one of whom I spent almost 2 years with, working on these pretty out there topics in the history of ideas. He was a kind of historical sociologist who was a big thinker. His name was David Kyle, and we had great conversations, super helpful and inspiring for me, but proved less immediately useful to the work that I was getting myself into. And so I shifted paths a little bit and found some people within my department who were experienced in the methods I was after. So any kind of ethnographic, qualitative, in the world, in the field work, this was really important to me. I'm a pretty outgoing type of person and found that ethnography was perfect for me because I can slither my way into almost any scene and find people I'm interested in, find questions I'm interested in, find things I could be good at, if you will, and contribute to that scene. And so people who had done something like that proved to be really helpful, almost regardless of their subject matter expertise. But they did line up for me. So I got some great help from my advisors who, luckily for me, were very clear about supporting my desire to write a more narrative project, to write a book, to write something that wasn't highly theoretical or even academic on the surface, who were trying to force me to figure out how to write well. And these people had, one of whom had Laura Grindstaff at UC Davis, had a background in journalism and was an excellent writer. And I loved her first book. And so she was super pragmatic with me in sense of like, hey, write something that people want to read. And I was like, yes, absolutely. So they defended me in a couple of moments, but I was also inspired by others in that department and beyond. Jennifer Lena out of Columbia in particular served as a mentor for me through the ASA, American Sociological Association mentorship program. But this is all to say, to your point, Beverly, that there were moments of tension for me in describing what my project was or what I was going to do with it, namely among people who thought, well, people who kind of looked at it as like an interesting project that wasn't necessarily as overtly political as they thought it should be. So that's sort of on one side, people looking at, and myself looking at a project about tattooing and thinking, oh, that's fun, that's interesting. But it's not about the things that are like really, really important. Like some of my colleagues doing work on incarceration, police violence, like houselessness, like these big topics, like infused with the dynamics of power and oppression, and really wanting to speak for those who don't have an active voice in the broader conversation. I mean, I came into my PhD wanting to do just that, and I came to trust over time, and this is part of what I tell students as well, is like, look, if our theories about power are correct, which I think they are, you're going to find it anywhere you look. Like, you don't have to go to a prison to find people taking advantage of one another. You can literally go to the dog park in a bougie neighborhood and write an incredibly interesting book about gender, about race and class from the perspective of someone who goes to a dog park. And I would like to read that book. Like, please write that book for us, right? Like, find, like, go get a job at Trader Joe's. Like, tell me about that story. So this project on tattooing was really helpful for me in trying to find the interesting and the important stories anywhere we look, because it's everywhere, and if you're not sort of on board with that, then you probably need to check like how you think about how power works in the world, if that makes sense. So there was like my response to that. I was all about experiential research, um, and I'll tell you what, that that actually helped me get a job where I now work, which is JP Morgan Chase of all places, who love my background and who really need people who are cultural sociologists. And so this was a huge surprise to me, where I was like, oh, okay. Because if you have friends in tech or whatever, if you know about this scene, I mean, they don't need sociologists to do their I mean, they have PhDs in freaking like quantum mathematics right there. Like, they don't need us to do their numbers, And so our superpower, I truly believe in sociology, is our understanding of human behavior, so there's like a kind of behavioral side to that, but also of culture, of meaning, and even of bodies.
So like
That's a
what are you
long-winded way.
what are you doing at Chase then with that? I think many
Alternative
people
careers in sociology.
exactly.
Right.
We need, this is
Right.
so important.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
that
so what do you yeah.
That could be the another podcast. I run social research projects. I do what's
Okay.
officially called user experience research,
Okay. Okay.
to help people understand how people out in the world think, feel, and act toward their money. So this is, I
Mm.
mean, it's economic sociology 101 all the time, and it's way, way more interesting than I thought it would be upon first learning about such things.
Is it like focus groups?
We do all kinds of methods. Yeah.
Okay, everything. Okay, we won't go too far down that, but
Yeah,
we
we won't.
definitely, we need to, yes, lots of PhDs are interested in what they can
Yeah.
do. So you were teaching in a community college during this time in the tattoo shop, but now you're not.
Yeah. I was lecturing at UC Davis, teaching at Berkeley City College. I was tattooing like 20 hours a week at that point, and writing the dissertation. And so I was working all the time. Tattooing, it involves a great deal of hustle, what we might call hustle, self-promotion, self-guided initiative, um, and a lot of downtime unless you're somehow full of work. So the life of the tattooer, as I experienced it, was wrapped up in other things I was doing on the side. And I found other tattooers who were also doing similar things, not teaching in colleges, but doing, design for their merchandise, or running some other gig over here, or um, trying to make ends meet in this kind of complicated juggle of multiple income streams. Now, I interviewed some tattooers who are very, very successful, people who make more than $1,000 a day, uh, and are booked up for a year. And this is in part because my project took place in the San Francisco Bay Area, where a lot of the sort of most prominent tattooing happens. It's less the case anymore because it's kind of happening in every major city, but San Francisco in particular was kind of a hub of tattoo innovation, especially throughout the 80s. And so in my life, balancing tattooing with teaching became a problem, and a problem I needed to solve. So one of the reasons that I jumped ship from academia, it is related to that desire to not work all the time, especially now that I have a toddler who's amazing and I want to spend time with him. So one of the questions I get from people who read the book or interact with my project is whether or not I'm still tattooing or will in the future. And the answer is no, in part because tattooing requires a kind of, well, if you will, chops. You've got to stay up on your game to do it well. And as you know, the stakes are high. So in tattooing, the marks you make are permanent and they're on someone's body and they're accomplished in an experiential moment with someone else, all in exchange for money. And so, you know, the idea of doing it as a kind of side project isn't a good idea. Maybe it's a good idea for some people, right? For some people that just want to tattoo their friends and they're not super concerned about the look of it, and maybe they're not even getting paid. Awesome. Tattoo your friends. But if you're going to do it professionally, you've got to take it very seriously. And so without being able to really give it what it deserves, I thought to not tattoo. And then the other part is just the time, right? I don't want to spend my Saturdays in a tattoo shop when I'd rather chase my little dude around the park and like eat ice cream. Sounds way cooler. What I've continued to find curious, and Beverly, you've recently released an article about you know, tattooing, being tattooed and being a professor, but even in my corporate experiences now, being someone with a bunch of tattoos, being someone with a history of having done tattoos on other people, at least in my environment, in my stage of my budding career, if you will, this hasn't shown up to be any kind of negative thing. Now, mind you, I don't have tattoos on my hands or on my neck or my face. I can be a non-tattooed person in public. I like the ability to do that if I have that desire, but I've not found the need to do that. In fact, I actually have a suspicion that it gives me a little bit of an edge that the people around me want in their life.
I would say that like one question I think that is probably really relevant to your work is what areas in the tattoo literature do you think where there's some missing pieces or some gaps or things that have not been explored?
That's a great question. So Beverly has covered a lot of that in her work. Beverly really was, I mean, your book was one of the first ones I picked up to learn about any of this stuff. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. A lot of what Beverly's work gets me thinking about is the experiences I don't and can't have, which is about being a woman who's tattooed or being a woman who's a tattoo artist, what that's like in public, what that's like in private, how people, let's say, you know, communicate their personalities and identities to the world, how they find themselves in these projects. And that literature for me helps build a broader understanding of what it's like to be a tattooed person and occasionally to be a person doing tattoos. I was inspired, of course, by Clinton Sanders's ethnographic work, Customizing the Body, David Lane's work on the other end of the needle. Those books helped solidify for me a kind of academic foundation for understanding the people who do tattoos.
I'm going to talk to Margot DeMello soon too.
Okay, so there you go. So like all of this work is there and it's out in the world and it's all used in my book. And I'm building on that work and thinking about it and using it to help develop my own understanding. The thing that I found, well, which had never happened, at least in the sociology literature, was for someone to do the tattoos themselves, go through the apprenticeship, um, do it professionally, do it for real in a shop, and then to write about it and see what happens. And so, like I said, it's not happenstance that I had that opportunity. And you could see in the book the ways in which I became part of that scene. But once I started doing tattoos, all of the ideas I had about what I thought was initially important about tattoos and tattooing were challenged, to say the least. The questions I had about tattooing as an occupation, for instance, really became far, far, far less relevant to the things I actually was encountering in the world and to the things that I needed to find success in my new role as a tattooer. It was the case that I sat down to tattoo my first client, who was my mentor, actually, in a kind of ritualistic moment, and my hand was shaking like a leaf. And for the first like dozen tattoos I did, I was really nervous and pretty freaked out about the whole thing. And so there was not like a magic, but there was this thing occurring between myself and the tattoo client that I thought, that I thought needed some explanation, at the very least for me, because I needed to figure this thing out. And so, like a lot of my favorite people, I kind of turned to books, I turned to writing, I turned to the desire to understand something about my life that was blowing my mind and that I wasn't finding in the literature and that I didn't even know how to talk about. And so I learned through this process that um, and here's the kind of motivational speaker moment, that I believe that the things that are most curious to us are the things about which we can tell the most compelling stories. And so a lot of people wanted me to tell to tell a story about tattooing that kind of emphasized, almost like a sort of white tattoo bro takedown book, right? About all these jerks who are tattooing. Um, and that wasn't interesting to me because when I sat to tattoo people, I was like, what is this? I thought I knew about this thing. And I had interviewed 50 something tattoo artists by this time. I had written an article about it. I was deep in it. I had lots of tattoos on myself. I had been tattooed a ton. And there was something about it that completely blew my mind. And I had never seen or thought about or heard before. And so my desire, my whole goal here was to chase that and to figure out like, what the hell is this? Uh, and I used the book to develop that understanding and to convey it to other people. So in the literature, though, like speaking more directly to sociological concerns, throughout the book is I'm building on and learning from literatures in sociology of the body, lots of stuff on that. There's pretty classic sort of interactionist theory going on throughout the text. So I'm often using Goffman and other folks who are thinking about social interaction and symbolic interactionism. But economic sociology makes its way in. There's a history of the racialization of bodies at some point in the discussion around the social and cultural life of skin, physical and cultural life of skin. There are references and use of French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu's theories around habitus. We're drawing on Howard Becker's approach to art worlds and thinking about the proliferation of conventions and conventional artistic approaches and cooperation. And so this isn't really leaning on one, let's say, literature, or it's not trying to develop any one particular point of view. The argument is really just as a kind of it's an exercise in situating people and trying to understand that situation. So the argument is really just thinking about how tattoo artists, well, it's positing the claim that tattoo artists exist at the intersection of people, bodies, and money, and that the promise of the book is that if you look at how they think, feel, and act within that intersection, you can find all kinds of insights related to how people in the world interact, how they think about themselves, how they make sense of the body in public, the body as a physical object, and how they make sense of all of that in the commercial context. So one of the reasons it's a little bit more of like a reading a book for people who like reading is that it's not like taking a claim and making a super specific sociological argument, but rather using insights from sociology to help explain something more broad, and very much using things that were only useful and not like trying to tack on some sort of concept or theory to very specifically and intentionally gain audience within a small section of sociologists. Like that's totally not my goal here.
I don't know if you know my professor at the New School, Terry Williams, also wrote in this kind of style, exploring like drug cultures and even the underground subway tunnels and stuff like that. It is like really interesting to get like a more readable book. Like your book is going to be appealing to a more general audience, but then it's still like through a academic publisher, which sets these other kind of boring standards. But in your, it is unusual for the author, like lots of us are heavily tattooed, tattoo collectors that have written on this topic. And so there's a lot of coverage on that. but I can't really think of anyone who was a tattoo artist. Was David Lane? I don't think so. He was just interviewing folks.
Yep.
And so you definitely have a lot of insight into that experience that I don't think was covered, because even people that are interviewing tattoo artists aren't necessarily thinking on that level of the body experience and asking those questions. Like reading through this book, and I totally relate, because I often, as a receiver of the tattoos, think about like, it would be so awful to be a tattoo artist. I would hate to be touching people and engaging with them. You have to be doing tattoos for every dollar you earn, and you capture that like anxiety of doing the tattoos and just the fear. Like, of course, like, gosh, it's so terrifying to mark people's bodies. And I'm interviewing, some queer tattoo artists, and one person told such a poignant story about how they would take it so seriously and be like, oh my God, I'm gonna, kill myself. Like I just did this tattoo that I'm so, horrified by. And so you capture that like, just the horror and anxiety of and fear of, like marking people. And I don't think that has gone into depth in the literature also.
Thank you. First of all, your comments mean a lot to me. Second of all, I think you're right. And here's an argument. One of the reasons it's not in the literature is that it's intentionally, out of view. People who do this for a living don't want their clients and other people to know that this is part of the game. It also becomes, routinized. And so people have been doing it for 15 or 20 years. They might have forgotten how freaky it was at first. They might not consider it something worthy of describing either. And this is something that I thought was really fascinating about truly embracing the call of ethnography, right? To try and explain what other people take for granted, which was that I would ask questions that would seem so ridiculous. And I kind of knew that they were ridiculous at the time of asking, but I needed to ask them anyways. And so people that I encountered, at least, were really taking a lot for granted about what they did, to the extent that they wouldn't probably think of these elements of their job as things that were going to be interesting to other people and or worthy of conversation in an interview, right? And so a lot of what we encounter when we interview tattoo artists, and I'm sure the same can be said for other people, we encounter things that they think will be interested in. I know that's a very basic thing to say, but when someone interviews you, you're like calculating, kind of like, okay, what does this person want to hear from me? They're probably not going to want to hear things that I just know in my bones, which is like, tattooing someone's smelly foot is uncomfortable. And or, shaving the hair off of someone's back is like at first a weird thing to do. The sheer fact that you can't really make money as a tattooer unless you're tattooing seemed quite obvious, and did drive me away from the tattoo thing in meaningful respects. And so you better believe there were many times that I looked at my situation and thought, oh, I'm going to be a tattoo artist. This is awesome. Like, this is rock and roll. We're making money. We're having fun. Like, I love drawing. I love meeting these people. I love being part of this scene. The autonomy is unmatched as well. Like, you really dictate your life. But, and here's where the sociology of expertise comes in, that you'll never find really on the surface in the book, but is very much in the background, because I really did a deep dive on that, which is like, tattooers are beholden to their clients. Like, they cannot do this thing without people showing up, asking them for work. And we see this in other arenas, but a lot of the tattooers I met, they grow tired of that over time, right? It's not like a nice place to be. Like, you don't want to be reliant on the consuming public for your money, especially when that consuming public might very quickly turn their money away from you and towards something else in times of need, or let's say a pandemic hits and you can't work, right? There are things about it that make it a precarious job. So the literature around like precarious work, service work is all coming in as well. And something I forgot to mention earlier, which was a big motivator for me, which was the sociology of emotions. work about how people are sort of dictating their emotional states, especially in the service economy. The idea that tattooers are service workers was intriguing to me, and not something I had considered initially until I started doing tattoos and finding that it reminded me of being a server in restaurants occasionally, where we have to put up with someone like just being annoying. You know what I mean? Like, tattoo clients can be super annoying. I, as a tattoo client, used to be really annoying, I think, now that I know what I used to do. And so, but the people that gave me tattoos were super cool and on board. And I'm like, wow, was I just like kind of a problem for them? I don't know. But at any rate, the fact that they are a kind of service provider is like a negative thing about their economic livelihood. However, let's, take it a step further, which is that tattooing is one of the most commercial and probably reliable ways to make money on artistic production. And so I know, and I've met people who are fine artists, who are incredible artists, who turn to tattooing because they know that they can make a living. And these are people who, have art in museums, like people who are actually getting grants, who are actually doing it for real. And they're like, yeah, well, you sell like 4 pieces a year or something. It's not gonna be sustainable, but you can tattoo and you can make a stable living. And so it was like something that was negative for me, but for others, it looks like, well, quite a cushy gig, if you will, because you're guaranteed uh, money every day if you can develop a following and make it happen.
I think when I think about like the economics of tattoo artists, and of course living in LA, there's a lot of jobs where, let's say you're working on a show and then the show is over, or you're working on project to project, and just like doing tattooing is, tattoo artists can also get sick, right, and have to be, they have the flu, they're not going to be tattooing for 2 weeks, right? That there is almost a requirement that you save money, and you put that money away for those periods of time when you're not getting the work or where you're unable to do the work. So I guess in the economic realm of that job where you have the autonomy, there's a lot of pluses to me. I'm just a old school guy who I need a certain amount of regular income coming in. Of course, many of us have different, income flows, right? But like you said, if you're a devoted tattoo artist, that is your income flow right there. And then when they're on the phone and they're not only just marketing stuff and putting stuff out there, but people are actually inquiring about a tattoo and that whole process. To do that through the social media, and to me, like, I'm still kind of old school. I'm like, can we do this through email or phone? But like to do it through DM, and it's just like it's too small. But
Yeah.
the idea of it, you have to have a certain level of responsibility, to be able to have a little have some type of savings going, for those thin areas.
At least two things to say about that, Akello. Thank you. It's super on point. I love the fact that you describe the desire for stability as being old school. Like I'm in that boat. Like, I'm 38 now. I have a kid, and I'm like, you know what? Life is expensive, and I don't want to be thinking about where my money's coming from all the time.
Yeah.
And um, I don't know. I might, yeah, I've been there, right? I don't want to be there. And so part of what's fascinating about the tattoo thing is questions around the apprenticeship. And what does an apprenticeship give somebody who wants to be a tattoo artist versus just learning on your own? There's tons of material out there now, especially available on the internet. You can buy ready-made equipment that's super reliable on the internet. Like, you can set up shop, you can market yourself through Instagram, which is usual now. We'll see what happens, but you could do it for real all by yourself. However, part of what's great about these apprenticeships, especially for people probably who are younger and not really established as like independent adults yet, is that a really good mentor could teach someone how to make a living at this thing, not just how to do tattoos and clean the floor, right? What you would
Mhm.
want out of that experience is someone to help you learn that saving is really important and that painting season is coming, which is a phrase that we would use to describe the slow season, which is a pretty regular occurrence in the winter, which is also so weird because it's so nice to get tattooed in the winter as opposed to the hot summer. But so it ebbs and flows. And so like my mentor would, and I would watch him do this with others, would talk to us about the money end of things and encourage us, first of all, to claim all of our money, to save it for a rainy day. And because he knows what it's like to live off the books. And then let's say you want to buy a house someday and you have to have proof of income. Well, if you've been, reporting that you've been making $300 a week for 10 years, right? Good luck securing a loan. Good luck securing good terms on a credit card. Like, good luck doing any of that. So,
Yeah.
um, however, a lot of people in the tattoo world who argue that, everyone should get an apprenticeship. This is part of the stance they take. I don't think that they're necessarily thinking about that, but that's something that came to my mind. Now, the economic sociology out there teaches us a lot about money, not only sort of the necessity to make it and keep it and save it and use it wisely, but the role of money in our social relations. And one of the things I found interesting was the work around intimate relations and money. So anywhere where you have a kind of intimacy that involves money, there's a really good little source of sociological insight there. And in tattooing, this is a very intimate experience with someone else. I'm sure you both have had this experience with someone tattooing you where you feel like, hey, they're touching my body, they're doing this thing to me, I'm trusting them to do it, we're having this moment, and maybe hours and hours of moments, and you can become very close to that person. And the question that I was getting from some of my colleagues early on was, well, but this is a job, this is for money. Like, everyone understands that they're paying money to have this moment with you. Like, what does that do to the intimacy? And so this is a question that I explore in the book, and around tipping too. You know, Spoiler alert, the whole idea here though is that the intimacy isn't at all sort of ruined by the money involved, but rather gives it character and gives the people who are involved a sense of understanding of the situation. So there is a kind of respect that is communicated through the price, and pricing the work itself also has uh, its own legs and a kind of artistic analysis. We could talk about that, but yeah, the money part of it's very interesting. And in part because tattoo clients, unlike people eating at restaurants in the United States, don't really know how much to tip. And so they would just ask you. I always found that to be a little awkward. But of course, I did that. I did that at first as well. Which is like, how much do you how much do you get? And the tattooers I know, and like they'll be like, well, whatever you can afford, 0 to 20%. But of course, everyone wants the tip.
That's a funny one because I got my sleeves in Australia and they're like, you don't need to tip. And I'm like, I'm an American. I cannot help it. I have to tip, and they're like, we charged you enough. So,
Can I?
and yeah, your book mentioned the pricing, and I don't think I've ever seen that mentioned in the literature either. Go ahead, Akello.
Oh, just because I didn't want to forget the point that you had
Yeah.
made, and it made me think about intimacy, things that you can pay people for intimacy, and intimacy is not really what you're paying for. Like when I go get a tattoo, I'm actually paying for the art that I'm going to walk out there with, but the intimacy is comes as a result of that close proximity and maybe the regularity. So it's different than it's almost like I always think about the things that people do, like going to, like I get my teeth cleaned. I have like a really good relationship with my dental hygienist and my dentist. I go there like 3 or 4 times a year, and I feel like I'm going to visit an old friend. But
Yeah.
for me, it creates a sense of being comfortable with that. And something that I'm very uncomfortable with is laying there and having someone go inside my mouth. And I think and then I would always be like, how could anyone ever make a living out of being inside someone's mouth? Because there's some really challenging situations inside people's mouth. I think I'd rather tattoo someone than be inside someone's mouth. So I feel like
Agreed.
there's a certain level of like specialness about people in the things that they're able to do that I would not be able to do, So I just wanted to like that point of like intimacy is interesting.
It
Yeah, I
is
love
because
that.
it's funny. Like I study all the sociology of the body stuff too, but I guess I'm kind of, yeah, personally repelled by these thoughts of doing body work. And so you capture that too, like just
Yeah.
that it is kind of off. Like, yeah, when I'm at my dentist, I'm like, why would anyone choose this for a living? This is awful. I only have to go there. Well, Akello's going there 4 times, but these people, all day, every day, like
Yeah.
in people's mouths.
Whew.
But
Yeah.
another body part or body experience that you capture in your book, and this is a great contribution to the literature too, because we don't see a lot about race in tattooing. I think I can think off my head like the one article on Chicano tattooing and within the community, Chicano tattoo artists and collectors. But definitely this is a huge issue within tattooing. We can think about the history of um how that repels people of color, and even just not even just the context, but specifically like if you walk into a tattoo shop and say I want an apprentice, they can just say no, get out of here, or
Mhm.
that the people have to endure racism to be in the shop. And then you go to conventions, I'm like counting the artists of color. And so I was thinking like maybe there's just great segregation within the field. And so folks are just finding other artists, but those artists don't show up to the conventions, on and on. And I mean, we all have heard tattoo artists talk about skin color in a discriminatory way, like, oh, you can't, it's harder to work with that darker skin types and putting images on. But you go into that in detail in the book. And this is, a huge part of tattoo culture that we don't get to read about. So that's great to see. So what was your experience around that?
First of all, thank you. I appreciate it. And my experience around that was, well, being an observer of the tattoo world and tattoo worlds, realizing, first of all, that there were shops that seemed um, to like specialize in tattooing people of color by people of color. This was in the Bay Area where people have these really intentional shops. And I thought that was really interesting. And there's definitely a story to be told there. Um, this focus on race in the book, in a chapter, forget which chapter, it comes out of this surprise I felt upon working as a tattooer, where I found myself dealing with skin in these kind of two ways. That is, skin as a physical object in the world, skin being the porous, organ that is part of our body, and skin also having a ton of meaning attached to it, namely in the form of race, but also we characterize skin features um, on the basis of other means as well, such as like age, um, even things like hygiene. And so there's a lot of stories to be told around the meaning we apply to skin. The fact that race is meaning applied to skin and skin's tone in particular, although there's phenotypical aspects of race and racial classification, was very interesting and impactful to me. And the fact that tattooing occurs with and on and indeed inside the skin, uh, I think locates the tattoo artist in a really fascinating and unique position uh, in our world. In our world in the United States, where so much meaning is applied to skin, these people have to approach skin as a kind of object of technical manipulation, as the thing that they work with. So approaching skin as a thing, as an object in the world, um, while also having to account for the fact that it has all of this meaning, was something that I just thought was profound. Now, in the tattoo shop, in an everyday kind of way, this wouldn't be necessarily discussed in terms of in political terms, where people would come in and ask like, hey, I want this tattoo. Um, can we do it with my darker skin, or can we do it over here on this lighter part of my body? So questions almost around skin tone would become technical questions. And I thought I'd never really talked about skin tone in that way with people, especially with strangers. Noticing the variation of skin tone across the body, like the fact that a person with what would appear to be rather dark skin would have a much lighter skin on the upper thigh. Now, this to me as a white person would occasionally surprise me. I'd be like, oh wow, like why didn't I know that that was the case? Like what is going on here? And the conversations I'd have with clients could illuminate some of the ways in which we would simultaneously talk about skin's meaning, that is race, and skin as a kind of physical medium of the body. And so, anyways, I situated myself in that question of the relationship between physical skin and the kind of cultural life of skin, and tried to make sense of what was going on when the tattoo artist has to navigate these two things simultaneously. Now, this is all put in the context of 2019, 2020, really, really prominent conversations around race and police violence, with what became known as Black Lives Matter. And so a lot of tattoo artists at that time were having these really public conversations around around the racism that they would find in tattooing, around questions around whether or not, such and such white guy over here who claims he can't tattoo in darker skin. Like, what does that mean for us? Does that mean he's just saying, I won't tattoo Black people? Or does that mean he's saying, I don't have the techniques and I need to grow as a kind of professional? And so thinking about this conversation as involving a kind of cultural politics and a very real life situation of oppression, and a kind of question about technique and like a kind of artistry and craftspersonship, if you will. Uh, and I just found that the public conversation among tattooers really involved a lot of stumbling around in this, in how to talk about skin technically, and how to do that in a way that recognizes the fact that skin also has deeply cultural meaning and significance. Um, and sort of how do you do both at the same time? And one of the arguments of the book is that, at least in the United States where I was tattooing, that seemed to be impossible, if not very difficult. To speak of skin on totally technical terms uh, just seemed really, really difficult, and to elicit, among others, a lot of critique. And so we deal with in the book like the sort of historical uh, racialization of skin, like how did we get here, and then moments in the tattoo shop um, where this seemed to be a straightforward situation. And so what's interesting about such a project, I found, was that you can take moments that seem benign and seem like every day, and ask pretty good big questions about them and come up with newer ways of thinking. Right. But I'll just add to that, which is that I think if I would have done this project while not tattooing, let's say I was interviewing people and learning about the world, I would have come across a really fascinating public conversation, and not come across the things that I began to learn and experience in my everyday life, which was how to tattoo, how to actually physically tattoo with a machine on skin that has like more melanin, right? Like, how do you avoid scarring somebody and some body that develops keloid scars more easily than other people? And how do tattoo artists come to recognize what they need to do in situation A versus situation B? And it's a technical conversation around voltage of the machine, around the speed of the hand, around the type of whether or not you go over a mark twice or three times. And so I think within tattooing, a lot of the public conversation around race wasn't as immediately applicable to what people needed to learn about how to tattoo well on different types of skin.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Because tattoo artists seem to try to talk about the technicalities in some ways to avoid race, but then there are important technicalities to discuss. And, my work with the Queercation group that brought together queer and artists of color, one of the things they mentioned, and I saw you mentioned in your book too, was just the representation on Instagram and how, if your clients are all white, and you mentioned that in the book, versus just putting out there that you do tattoo a diverse clientele in your representation on Instagram, and then folks will see that, or also be, repelled, like, oh, they don't, do darker skin as such.
Absolutely. And I use this book to be as authentic and sort of coming clean as possible. There's lots of like vulnerability in the text, and one of them is in that moment where I realized that, hey, like if you look at my Instagram, like almost all my clients have these like really pale arms and legs, and sort of what's going on with me and about how I'm presenting myself in public. That almost all of my clients are like white people, and questions about how people edit photos came up in ways that I thought was really interesting at this intersection of art, technology, and marketing, where people try to brighten the colors of their tattoos on the internet so that they quote unquote pop off the page and accidentally end up conveying this sense that everyone they're tattooing is like super pale when they're not actually in real life. This broader question around how tattooers how they present their work in public came up as well that I found pretty intriguing.
That was my takeaway from the Queercation conference of like, oh, that was, a good point. And so I was glad to see that in your book. I'll just ask one final question. I'll turn it over to Akello, and then Dustin can have any final concluding thoughts. But because time is ticking, and I feel like, gosh, there's so many topics to still talk about. But you talk about coming from, the organizational sociology, like workplace occupations. I once submitted a tattoo paper to a journal about occupations and workplace, and they desk rejected it, saying this isn't an occupation. Send this to a tattoo journal. It's like there's no tattoo journals. This is an occupation, but it's different than other occupations in being less regulated. I mean, it's regulated, through the health department, and you have to have a business license, but there's no HR department. And to get in a traditional apprenticeship, walking in and, like getting abused is part of the kind of traditional, apprenticeship talk. And so, and you included, and I don't think I've seen this in the academic literature either, because it's a new kind of current event, is the Me Too issue within the tattoo community specifically. You mentioned some cases and even named some names. And of course, like my work with female tattoo artists, like they were talking about how this occupation and workplace is just a environment rife for sexual harassment and intimidation like that, and that all the old school tattoo artists put up with that stuff, or they came into the profession through their husbands, through their boyfriends back in the day, and so just that kind of issue that this doesn't have an HR department or an official kind of place, you'd have to go to the state and stuff like that. So I think that would be my concluding, question, is just about that kind of sexual harassment in the workplace and maybe more official pathways in the future. Because I think maybe in the future for tattoo research, they could focus on issues of like, we can get away from the tattoo, the body, and the meaning, and talk about like policy and bigger things, employment law discrimination about tattoos in the workplace, or but just even policy regulating this particular workplace.
So you hit, yes, definitely. You're describing something that's incredibly important and kind of widely known, and known in the literature because of you mostly and your work. Thank you very much. And I have a couple of thoughts. One of them is that I believe, well, people in tattooing have been sort of self-organizing so as to set up situations that are best for them. And I think it's so encouraging and interesting to watch people open explicitly feminist shops, right? Or, sort of places that they determine the rules for themselves. And I think this is one tactic that people take, which is that hey, well, it seems like a lot of the shops in this town are pretty uninviting to people like me. Let's build our own and let's make it a space for trans folks, for queer folks, for people of color. Let's make this awesome. And so that is one tact, which is like, if it's not there, build it yourself, right? And people shouldn't have to, but I know that people find great joy in establishing scenes like that and creating a kind of place for people, for themselves and for people like them to do something as interesting and fun as tattooing. I think the question around regulation is just fascinating, and it still does nag at me, which is not only like why are tattoo why is tattoo not considered an occupation by some people? I think part of the problem is that people might consider it art. I like thinking of tattooing as art, and I discuss this in the book, but I did a really deep dive into whether or not, the question of whether or not tattoo people who do tattoos are artists or not, or the history of craft, the history of tattooing, the history of art. And I think one of the interesting things about tattooing is just that it's incredibly diverse in terms of how people approach it. So people can approach it as artists, where they put the value of what they do on the design end of things. They really privilege novelty over repetition and expression over legibility. They speak in the terms of fine art. They think of themselves as people who produce art. They likely make things other than tattoos, which includes something, in a different type of visual medium. And then there are tattooers, which are more like technicians, people who are getting really good at the craft, learning the tools and trying to do as much as possible with those tools to produce reliable, replicable results. And so when you think of tattooing as a kind of art, though, you probably don't think of it as a kind of job. And I think one of the benefits of tattooing as a kind of technical profession is that it becomes more easy to imagine it as a job and to describe it in the terms of occupations. Whereas people that approach it as a kind of expressive art form, um, that vocabulary is less applicable, less readily available. I hope that answers some of your, or addresses some of your curiosity there. And the question of whether or not tattooing will be more regulated and why is something that I don't know. I didn't spend a ton of time in there because I had this other whole different trip that I was trying to chase down.
Well, I just wanted to share some of the things that I did a bullet list of things that really stuck out for me that I think are really interesting in the book. And I just want to kind of read those for whoever's watching the video, and they'll be like, "Oh, that sounds like I want to get into that." But I put good to work with versus great tattoos. I think we've all had experience with that. I'm going to go through this list, and if there's anything you want to grab anything. Perceived as good, authentic performance or proficiency, performative masculinity versus organic masculinity, the permanence of mistakes, navigating conversations around skin color and race, which you talked about, good to work with versus great tattoos, carnal commingling, um, Instagram is primary source of marketing, which you talked about, the role of masculinity, repression of sexual meanings of the body when performing body labor. And then I was wondering, is teaching mind labor? And then the sociology of the olfactory, detecting the changes in client's odor. I'd never read anything like that before, detecting the changes in client odor. I was like, wow. Because I've worked in places where I've worked with people and I found a way to just close my nose off so I don't really smell anything. So I've never been open to that. Or I'll just put some Vicks Vapor Rub in my nose if there's like a situation that's really going to make me gag. So if there's anything that you want to grab onto in that list.
Sure. So around the kind of sensorial experience and the olfactory sociology, the whole idea is that smells offer a source of information that tattooers I met use and rely on in their work occasionally. And you have to train yourself in order to become proficient in understanding and translating this information, the smell, into like useful bits of advice for yourself and what you're doing. Namely, when your client seems to be starting to sweat, that kind of pungent fear sweat, and you're thinking, okay, this person might pass out. And my mentor really blew my mind with this, where he would be able to tell when he needed to take a break. And I'd ask him like, oh, okay, like when do you know? Like, is it just because your back hurts or whatever? And he'd be like, nah, dude, like you can tell like when someone's really going through a hard time by what they smell like. And I was just like, okay. And so, mind you, here's a bit of talking at the tattoo shop on a regular random Wednesday or whatever, that if I wouldn't have been taking extensive notes, I probably would have forgotten about.
Yeah.
But going back and seeing all of this talk about smells and thinking, what is smell doing for these people? And then learning in the face of it while trying to tattoo the live squirming bodies of strangers for money, realizing myself that here was another source of info I could use to help me in my daily life. And so we draw on like sensory socialization to explain that. The point you mentioned earlier around the tattoo being good, you had previously talked about the price and how you go in to get you walk in, you pay for a piece of art that you walk out of. Well, I found some of my clients saying things like, yeah, well, this awesome tattoo, I didn't like it for a while because the person who gave it to me was a jerk. And comments like that started to make sense to me in realizing that the experience of getting the tattoo for the client is really powerful and important. And that experience, the memory of getting the tattoo, is kind of embedded in the piece itself over time. And it has this lasting quality that doesn't seem to be there on the surface. We often think tattoos are permanent, meaning the lines, the color. But, you know, Beverly, I'm sure you remember what it was like to get your sleeves done in Australia. And I'm sure if that would have been a really terrible trip, you'd been looking at your arms thinking, wow, these are beautiful, but they remind me of this terrible trip I had. And so what does that say, right? Taking it the next step, which is, okay, well, that means if you're a tattooer, not only do you have to do great tattoos, you have to give people good experiences. And what if you're grumpy? And what if that person is like ruining your day with some story that you don't want to hear? And you're like, well, you know what? Like you do not want that person to leave thinking like, oh gosh, this is beautiful, but I'm never going back to that dude.
They didn't worry about that back in the day.
They did not. And some people still do not. But luckily, and here's part of what's cool about tattooing today is you find your person. You know, you
Yeah.
find the person that you really want to work with. And this is the advice I give to people who are just starting out in their little tattoo journeys, which is like, find the art that you're stoked about. But just as important, make sure that that person and that scene and that environment is a place that you want to be in,
Yes.
and you want to leave feeling great about having been there.
And that's the benefit of back in the day when you had to walk into the shop and look at the photo album, because you're also feeling the environment, seeing the shop, seeing the people, and seeing if that's a person that you want touching your body. But I love Akello's point too on the masculinity's point.
Yeah, part of what I was seeking there was this sense that I had where I would go into the tattoo shop and ask questions about the role of gender in the shop and whether or not the environment itself, including the music, the smell, the look, the paint on the walls, the art, what that was doing to the gender in the room. A lot of sociologists think about gender as a kind of social accomplishment, something that occurs as an outcome of interaction. And this seemed very true to me, that you can tweak elements of the scene. Let's say change the music, change the paint, put a few plants in, and all of a sudden that tough tattoo shop that made me feel more like a man than I usually feel is starting to feel maybe more comfortable for me. In part because it's not sort of imposing upon the scene a certain expectation for masculine performance. And so part of what was fun for me was thinking about the role of the environment in the production of masculinity, and especially music, and how that would lend itself to a certain quality. And for instance, this came up after talking to many of my clients who would say something like, you know, well, I walked into this shop and there was like, you know, like death metal music playing really loud. And it wasn't,
Exactly.
you know, and it like wasn't my scene. And I'm like, wow, the music really matters.
It really
It
does.
really does. It really does. It's so funny because I was just while you were talking, I was thinking about all the environments that I've been in in terms of getting tattoos. I remember I lived in the Bay Area. I got a tattoo in Alameda. I don't even remember where it was, but I've gotten tattoos in garages, not pretty garages, but garages like as is. And then I've gotten tattoos at a black owned and operated high-end Beverly Hills tattoo studio. So then there's a whole nother realm of like that, me coming in there, hey, how you doing, and to me, like what's the music that's playing is so much more important to me than anything. All those other factors I can work with, but if the music is, if I'm going to sit there for 3 to 5 hours and the music is not giving me that vibe, I'm not going to be able to sit there. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah. And the music communicates information about what you can expect from the people, from
Yeah.
the environment, right? And one of the things that I reference in the book is about how like retail store develop, like interior designers and people who build businesses and companies know this pretty well, and they figure out how to tweak things about the environment that to give you a certain brand experience. And
Yeah.
if you're really like part of what making money about tattooing, part of what I think about that is like, I kind of wish that people would be a little more attuned to what those folks are doing. Like when you walk
Yeah.
into whether it's a Krispy Kreme donut shop
Mhm.
or whatever, or Abercrombie and Fitch store, or your favorite cool boutique, that's got like 12 sweatshirts in the whole store, and you're like, how does anyone do this? Like those folks, if they're successful at it, are paying a lot of attention to the lights, to the smells, to the sounds,
Yeah.
everything about it, to try and communicate to you some sort of thing that you want to be a part of. And I think the old, like, crusty, hardcore tattoo shops do this perfectly for people because people want to be involved in that. They're like, I want to go to a biker shop. Well, look, that shop is perfect biker shop, right? And sort of, but you can go to another studio or another shop and feel like, wow, I'm so glad this isn't a biker shop.
True.
That's great because now it brings your current work as user experience and the tattoo shop together or the user experience of the tattoo shop.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
I've
yeah,
learned a lot. Yeah, that would make me a more successful tattooer now.
but how about are there any other points you wanted to make that we didn't get to, or other just statements?
I think that one of the things that I've left this project thinking about is something I mentioned earlier, which is about, if I have advice for people who want to make sociological works, even if they're interested in tattoos, I just really think that our best, like really good projects have this kind of are driven by an authentic curiosity. And I think you can experience that. I mean, I'll speak for myself. Like even if I walk into a home, if I have the opportunity to walk into some place that's beautiful and made by some architect, you can tell. You can tell that there's passion behind the work. And so that's something that I have just found to be really transformative about this project that isn't even related to tattoos necessarily. Tattoos, and tattooing and the fact of becoming a tattoo artist is really used as a case in trying to explain and explore something else about the world, which is what most ethnographies try to do. They say, hey, let me tell you about something that you probably relate to, even if you don't care about tattoos, that I found here among these interesting people. And so I would just love to see more work that, not to say more work like mine, but I guess I am saying that in a way which feels a little pretentious. But, I'd love to see people just chasing down things that they're curious about, whether it's in tattoos or at the dog park or in whatever venue they find, and to develop from that, a framework, or let's say it's a concept that seems tailor fit to what they were finding. And I guess in the sociological perspective of tattooing, I have all kinds of new questions that I wish I could explore as well. Those related to more obvious things like the proliferation, let's say, of queer tattooing, questions around why people are more, sort of able to get tattoos than they were before in terms of social sanctions. But also, I would love to learn about people who build tattoo machines, thinking about tattooing as a kind of industry, thinking about the people who set up and run conventions for a living, thinking about the broader constellation of things that are involved in the production of tattoos as a kind of cooperative effort, really harkening on Becker's art worlds. Where are these inks coming from? Who makes them? Who's working at the ink factory? Like, I would love a tattoo, quote unquote, tattoo book from someone who spends time understanding the production of the tools, and even if those tools are seemingly not especially tattoo-y, but let's say they're digital or what have you. That's interesting to me. But I guess I'll leave it there. I mean, my desires for people to read the book, part of what you have probably experienced is when you make something, there's this whole nother step of getting it out into the world, in trying to develop a kind of audience for the work. I mean, my dream is for sociology students to pick this up and think like, wow, this is something that's interesting and that's full of little nuggets of insight. And so my next goal is to figure out how to get sociology teachers to assign the work. So I'll be speaking at social conferences this year, and to try and accomplish that goal.
That's fantastic.
Awesome.
That would recruit us some new sociology majors too. And good topics.
I hope so. I hope so. Because I think there's a great power in sociology.
Yes.
Definitely it's still a true believer in its insight.
So are we.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about your brand new book, and good luck with getting that out there into the sociology students' hands and the public's hands too.
Thank you both for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.